I'm the channel director for the East for Masergy. Hopefully you guys know who we are. Morgan's going to present on our security offering. So we have 3 pillars we really focus on. You know, hybrid networks are our big focus. That's what we've been known for 18 years. Hybrid voice. When I say hybrid voice, the reason we say it like that is because we can do UCaaS, contact center, and SIP. So we're one of the few providers that can hit all levels and give you the SLA on the network if you have it. So we also do security. So Morgan's one of our security experts. We also have folks in Dallas. We have 3 global SOCs, which he'll get into. And he's really here to educate you guys on that. He'll touch on some network stuff and why we win large network deals. So we have Seth Gentry, who is my channel manager. He works with me to help onboard partners. So we don't just, like John Nettles is the veteran in the room. He's been with us almost 2 years now. Been in the industry forever down here. But we also have Seth, who if you're newer to Masergy or you need information, he can help set up trainings, time with the SEs, really take a deeper dive. That way you're not just like, okay, we talked to John, we love John, but what else is there? John can help you guys sell deals and really get involved in the partner side, but Seth can really help on the onboarding stuff. We also have Adam Woodward. He is our mid-market rep that tag teams with John. So if there's deals between 3 and 10K, that's where they'll come into play. But like our average deal on the East Coast last year was $21,000. So we're typically working on the higher end. So about 6 months ago, we teamed mid-market that sits in Dallas. And we joked with Adam yesterday, it's his first time leaving Dallas other than the Houston event. So we're the first people to bring him in the field. And then, so to kind of give you guys this guy's world, he walked into the W, Fort Lauderdale, 2 days ago. I traveled, I think, 90 nights this year so far. It's his first sleepover at a hotel. And he got upgraded to the presidential suite, which was 2,600 square feet, 2 bedrooms, the biggest shower any of us have ever seen. The room was as big as this. Panoramic view of Fort Lauderdale and the beach. And he's 27-year-old, first travel night. This guy got engaged last night. And so he got engaged.
I know.
He got engaged in Fort Lauderdale last night. Adam got the presidential suite, so we're literally with him last night going, you should probably give Morgan a room. And he's like, screw that. After 3 tequila shots, he's like,
room.
He texts Morgan, he's like, if you answer, I'll give you the room. And he never answered, so he didn't get it. But without further ado, Morgan
busy.
McGowan, he's literally going to just kind of go over, I think, industry to educate you guys, security, why partners should be selling security and bringing it up to their partners or customers. I don't think enough are. And from what we hear from our partners selling with us or selling to others, it can be one of the easiest appointments to get for the large enterprise customer or mid-market. Because they have IT guys trying to watch security threats that don't know what they're doing. Like, not knock on the IT guy that gets promoted, but he's not a security expert. So that's what Morgan's going to kind of touch on. So without further ado,
Yep.
Morgan.
Thanks, Johnny. No, I mean, so, as Johnny mentioned, so Masergy acquired a company called Global Data Guard in 2014. And we made this acquisition of this managed security company because what we were finding is that our reps were getting involved in security discussions anytime network was coming up. And we needed to have a good solution for that. And so we acquired a company that provides what Gartner brands as managed detection and response, which is ultimately just a practice around the ability to detect threats within an environment and shut those threats down before damage can be done. But before I go into the solution, I was going to give you just a little bit of history or some context as to why a lot of executives and a lot of IT folks are willing to have conversations around security, why they're so forthcoming with information when you ask, hey, what are you doing from a security perspective? And then we'll dovetail that into kind of how we're addressing some of those concerns. So if you watch the news, we know that breaches happen all the time, right? I mean, even just, this past week, a particular hotel chain may have had a security breach. And so these things are happening, these things are occurring on a pretty frequent basis. And what you'll notice with this slide is that, over time, what they're starting to do now is they're starting to associate a dollar amount with the breach that occurs, right? So they're saying, okay, hey, it's not just the number of records that got impacted, but this is how much it cost that company in either operating expense and having to pay for credit monitoring services for their customers, or having to go hire outside forensic firms, which are not expensive or not cheap, to figure out what exactly had happened. And the longer that goes by from the time that there's a breach that occurs to the time that you discover it, the more expensive it is to figure out what happened. And in a lot of these examples, years had gone by and they had to spend tens of billions of dollars to figure it out. But what they don't talk about is what are the motivation behind these breaches. So why are hackers interested in getting all this data? And so I just wanted to share a couple of numbers with you that I thought are pretty interesting. It allows you to kind of contextualize if you have a customer that's hosting sensitive data or they have sensitive data, how much that data is worth to somebody trying to steal it. And then ultimately, if they don't have sensitive data, how much an accidental click on a phishing email could cost that company. And the city of Atlanta is a great example of that. So ultimately the motivation behind breaches is money. And I pulled these numbers off of Forbes about 6 weeks ago, and these things tend to change from time to time, but ultimately the ranges remain consistent. If you look at the value of a credit card number on the black market, depending upon the age of the number, the type of credit card, and the balance of the credit card, you can get between $5 and $12 per credit card number. So think of a small business that, a coffee shop is a good example that may do, a couple hundred transactions a day. If they have 1,000 unique customers, a hacker could spend that afternoon and make between $5,000 and $10,000 just selling that data on the open market. If you look at organizations like Equifax that have quite a bit more information on us, like social security numbers, that data goes for about $30. So if you think that, hey, there was 500 million records that got stolen, I'm sure you get a bulk discount if you buy 500 million, but ultimately that could be in the billions of dollars of revenue that an organization can make off of stealing that data. And then when you get to bank account information, it goes up to 300. And then when you get to a full identity or an identity profile, which can include healthcare data, imaging screenshots, anything that could be used to replicate someone's identity and apply for credit, goes for $1,200. So as you can see, the data is extremely valuable, and there's a huge motivation for cyber organizations to go steal this money to fund whatever that is that they're doing. And so there's huge markets for this. You think that this is all European-based markets or things that are overseas, but there are some domestic markets that sell this information as well. There was an organization, or there was a website called Carter's Market that was developed by someone based out of San Francisco that just got shut down 3 years ago. And they were doing about $80 million in transactions a year to local domestic hacking groups. So it's definitely an issue, and that's why you hear this stuff happen in the news. But not every customer has what we would deem valuable data, right? So some companies that you might be working with say, hey, I don't have anything that the hackers are interested in, and that could be true. But what often happens is that you hear a lot about ransomware, like the city of Atlanta, for instance. What cybercrime organizations are doing is they're sending out phishing emails, and a simple accidental click can lead you to a website that infects a machine, that infects more machines, that shuts down your business for a period of time. And then, of course, they ask for money in exchange for the keys to decrypt all those files. And a lot of times, those keys don't even exist. But if you look at where we expect this to go in 2019, they're saying the cost to businesses is going to be $11.5 billion of what ransomware is going to do just in the U.S. alone. And the average cost of a ransomware attack on an organization is $175,000. And I talk to companies all day long, every day long, and this isn't FUD. This stuff is actually happening. There are companies that call us all the time and say, hey, we got hit by a ransomware attack. Can you help me? And a lot of times when that happens, it's too late because you simply just can't decrypt the files that they've encrypted, and you have to have preventative measures in order to prevent something like this from happening. But the question remains, if you look at some of the large organizations on the previous slide, it's not like they're not well resourced. They have tons of money. They spend tens of millions of dollars a year on security. Why on earth are breaches still occurring? And the simple answer is because it only takes one unpatched server, it only takes one misconfiguration, it only takes one user accidentally clicking on an email to cause a lot of damage. And so the battlefield's a little bit lopsided in the sense that you have to be perfect 100% of the time, and the attacker only's got to get it right one time. And there's a lot of motivation for them to get it right. There's a huge monetary motivation for that. And so the traditional approach to this problem has been to look at different what we call point solutions. So you look at a firewall, you look at a certain security technology that's supposed to satisfy a certain type of threat. And you go buy that technology and you implement it, and you have a level of comfort that that's going to keep you safe. And that's what people have been doing for quite some time. And there's a lot of value in these solutions. They definitely do help in combating certain types of threats that are out there, but it's just simply not enough. All the companies that got breached have got some level of security. The issue is that they're just not managing the security in the right way. And so, what ends up happening is that you've got folks that are maybe on the network team or the IT team that have been tasked with being able to monitor these security devices. And ultimately, this is a pretty tall task. If you look at a mid-size organization, they're having to triage about 17,000 what we call security events per week, which just means that the noise these devices are generating. And only about 19% of those are actually legitimate events that they actually have to do something with. And so there's an immense amount of time that's wasted with investigating these events, and of course time means money, and time also means they're not doing their day job. And so you combat the fact that these devices are hard to manage and the fact that if you're not looking at them full time, you're going to miss something. You combat that with the fact that there's a security talent shortage, and you have a disaster on your hands. And so what a lot of organizations are starting to find out, and I hear this quite frequently, I've got a lot of friends that I've worked with in my past lives that are still a practitioner from a security perspective. They're an analyst. They're working for companies that are paying them lots of money to monitor and manage these security devices and to keep them safe. And ultimately, they're changing jobs about every 18 months because they're getting a call from a recruiter that says, hey, we're going to pay you $20,000 or $30,000 more than your last employer, and they're 2xing their salary every 2 or 3 years. And it's legitimate. These guys are getting paid a lot of money. And so it's really hard for smaller companies to compete with the larger companies paying a lot. And it's also hard to retain that security talent. And so the traditional approach by a lot of companies has been to hire what's called a managed security service provider, which has been really focused on just looking at those security devices and making sure that they're properly configured, making sure that they're up to patch state, and making sure that that the devices are online and doing their job. But where there's a gap is that there's not a formalized practice around the ability to detect threats in those environments and have a remediation practice put together to get in front of the threat before it causes damage. And so what Gartner ended up creating was a new category called MDR, which is Managed Detection and Response, which is really a practice specifically around the ability to detect a threat and the ability to shut that threat down either proactively or in real time before damage can be done. Because in all the scenarios that we talked about earlier, all those companies that have had breaches, their security tools were working. Their security tools detected the threat. But the staff took them 7, 8, 9, 10 months, 4 years to figure it out. And because so much time went by, all that forensic data is either gone, and the attacker certainly moved on. It's really tough to be able to track that down. And nowadays, with compliance standards like HIPAA and like GDPR, there's now breach notification laws that make you tell the public what's exactly has happened, how they're impacted by these breaches. And oftentimes you're having to do that before you have all the details, which is a lot of times why you see news presses or news releases that say, hey, there's been a breach, we know absolutely nothing, but you're probably impacted. And then over time you begin to hear more and more about it. That's because that they're being forced by regulatory compliance to let folks know. And so what Masergy has done, I'm going to tab through this real quick. What Masergy has done is we put together a practice that is really based upon doing two different things. One, to take advantage of existing security technologies that companies have already purchased, because oftentimes the guy that you're talking to or the gal that you're talking to has made a very big purchase for a security technology and they're tied to that for whatever reason. And so you don't want to just throw that out the window. You want to make sure that you have the ability to integrate with existing stuff, as well as be able to introduce a standardized set of tools that give you complete visibility over an environment. The other important thing that's happening, or a trend in IT, and we heard this a little bit earlier, is that critical assets are no longer just standing in corporate data centers. They're beginning to move into the cloud. And so being able to have a good security practice around detecting events that are happening both on-prem and in cloud-based environments is also very important. Being able to correlate those events together is critical, because you also are hearing about cloud platforms becoming breached and customer data being lost that way. You want to make sure that you have a holistic view, both on-prem in the cloud or anywhere that corporate assets exist. And so I can certainly go into this if we have questions, but ultimately the goal behind this is to be able to have a good detection technology for on-premise based events through an appliance that we manufacture and deliver to that customer, integrate with existing security technologies, and then be able to tie into different cloud services to make sure that we have complete visibility. The other important thing, and specific to the verticals that we operate or that we do very well in, is a lot of customers don't like this information leaving their data center. And so anything that we collect, any of the forensics that we do, everything is remaining on site. And our analysts simply just tunnel in, provide 24/7 eyes on glass coverage. Now, there's some automation technology involved in our product. It does do some behavioral analytics, or there's some automation involved. But effectively, it relies on the engineers to do the most forensic analysis. The tools are great, but really today, AI is not far enough along to automate all of this stuff. And so what we do is something called risk-based prioritization, which allows us to elevate the most critical events to our analysts, for our analysts to actually research those events, and then when we find something, only elevate the events that require customer activity, and tell them what we found, why it's important, and what they have to do in order to remediate that. And so I'll pause for a sec. It's kind of a lot of information if you guys have any questions. No? All right.
I have just one question.
Sure.
One of your previous slides on credit cards.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
When I go to anywhere, they run my credit card.
Yep.
Is that the information that a hacker wants, just my number and my name? And I would assume maybe the 3-digit code on the back. Is that what's being sold?
It is.
Or is there more than that?
That's it. All they need is the same information that you're going to put into a website whenever you go purchase something online. So ultimately, that's what they're doing, right? They're going to take that information, they're going to purchase goods online, they're going to sell those goods, and then that good's going to turn into physical money for them. So all they really need is your credit card number, the expiration date, and if they can get it, your CVE number. But not all transactions require your CVE on the back. So very limited data.
So as a consumer, the only protection I have is from my credit card company to negate that charge if it's not real.
Well, yes. I mean, there's consumer protection. What's happened? Europe is a lot further ahead than the U.S. is as it relates to the way that they hold merchants accountable for fraudulent charges. So we all have now chip and PIN cards. So beforehand we just had a regular card. Now we've got the little chip on the front. Right. Europe's had that for 10 years. And the way they got the merchants to convert those over was saying, hey, if you don't have a chip and PIN, then if there's a fraudulent charge, you're responsible for it. And they all switched over almost immediately. They've now begun to do that in the U.S., and so now you're seeing, almost everything is now chip and PIN, which means that the POS terminals are less likely to be compromised. It's whenever you put your credit card number into a website, and then they're storing that credit card data, and that website becomes breached. That's where the risk is. It's less about you going to a store and swiping your card. It's more about online activity, and then that company becoming breached, right? Because you have to think, not all online shops are sophisticated, right? They could be fairly basic. I could go make one really quick online, and I could do it. I could take a credit card number, and then you're relying on me to secure the data that you're providing to me. And so it definitely differs based on the level of merchant. But for an attacker, if you're looking at, like a Shopify that's hosting, tens of thousands of websites and they're hosting an immense amount of data, that's a really good target. So it just depends. But again, the example of, not having to only, store maybe a couple thousand card numbers and be able to still make $10,000, $20,000, or $30,000 for an afternoon's worth of work, it's well worth the time, which is why it's happening so much. So, I guess the other important thing is that, ultimately whenever you introduce, any security technology, those technologies produce an immense amount of data. And, what you hear a lot about is, if network folks are responsible for managing those technologies, they get what's called alert fatigue, meaning that they're having to constantly go review logs or constantly having to figure out what's going on behind the scenes. And these it could be millions and millions and millions of raw pieces of information that's occurring every single day. And so what our goal to do is to be able to take those millions of packets of raw data and distill those down to just a few manageable alerts. So we're going to be able to eliminate between 80 and 90% of the security workload off of a customer's shoulders, and just simply deliver them, actionable things like patching servers or taking endpoints offline. Just pretty simple stuff when it boils down to just the things that we provide customers. A lot of times you might hear about someone that wants to build their own SOC. And so these are some numbers, these are some conservative numbers on what it would cost an organization to build a 24/7 security operations center. You're typically looking at, in the low hundreds of thousands of dollars per year per employee. You need 8 employees in order to have a 24/7 shop based on shift work and vacation time. And that's conservatively estimated just for staffing at $85,000 a month. Now you can strip that down and say, okay, only 3 people maybe. You're still looking at 30 or 40 grand a month just to hire 3 security guys. It's not cheap.
Yeah, we're going to send these slides out to Jen, but this is probably the most important slide. We do these presentations across the country. This is one of the most important. I think you've scaled the numbers down just so it's
Quite substantially. So it wasn't in the 6 figures is why I scaled it down, but yeah.
So imagine trying to build a SOC and you're a 500-person company, you're trying to build a SOC, and you're trying to hire a CISO, you're trying to hire a security people you can't find, and they leave every 3 days and get $20,000 a month. This is kind of the reason we have been successful in this market, and others that you get the TCG can probably sell, right? There's reasons why folks are outsourcing their security companies and guys with SOCs.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, and ultimately, a lot of technology executives understand this. I mean, they've gone through it. We met with a company just last week, and we said, hey, I was going to build my own SOC. I'm fully capable as a CISO to do that. I have the experience. I've run them before. I can't keep guys around. I've got one guy that just left and one guy that's about to leave, and we just can't compete with some of the bigger shops out there that are starting to hire this talent. And so even if you have a capable executive, which is oftentimes you will, they're having challenges from an employee retention standpoint, and it's something that they're not used to having to deal with, and especially with big companies like Amazon moving into New York and moving into different cities, they're having to compete with big technology companies who are willing to move employees across the country to go work for them.
Do you guys run the gamut of firewalls? Do you do SIEM as a service as part of that?
It is, yeah. So it's so we have a tool suite. A SIEM is a part of that tool suite. On the networking side of the house, we do sell firewalls, but we can integrate with any commercial firewall that's out there. It doesn't matter what make or model it is. The technology is somewhat agnostic in the sense that you don't have to have a specific technology already implemented for us to work. It pretty much works off the shelf with whatever it is that a company or an organization has. And what it eliminates them having to do is go through the pain of procuring additional security equipment, having to go through the pain of hiring security talent, and then ultimately having to retain that talent, or some of the things the challenges that we're seeing with a lot of these security companies. People are reviewing security technologies a lot more frequently than they review network. So if you have a long-term network deal, a lot of times you're going into looking at their security methodology every year. And so there's maybe 2 or 3 security displacements for every network displacement. And so these are happening, mid-contract. So we go in there with security, we talk about security. It's in the middle of a network that's not on to off term for another 2 or 3 years. We get in with our security, they become embedded with us, they understand our story and the way that we handle our security events, and then they begin to trust us with network. And the flip side of that is we're also beginning to see if we want to displace an incumbent that's providing security services, it's a requirement to have security. So if you go in trying to replace, Verizon or an AT&T, for instance, and they're providing security services, and you can't complement your replacement network with security, then it's a showstopper. It's not going to happen. So target market for this, typically we see success in the range of 500 employees to 5,000. That's kind of what our sweet spot is. Anything under that, we tend to say they don't have quite enough budget to afford a service like this, with the exception of financial services and legal, which are 2 big verticals for us. But we'll see small hedge funds that have 15, 20 employees that they need something like this, and the same thing on the legal side. On the top end, we find over 5,000 employees. They have enough security investment and they have enough staff that they're trying to wing it on their own, and they're typically not open to kind of outsourcing all of it. They're going to outsource maybe 1 piece or 2 pieces, but they don't want to outsource the whole bit. And from a pricing perspective, these solutions range anywhere from $5,000 a month, all the way up to $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a month. So it's a pretty wide-ranging service, but ultimately it's priced off of number of users, number of locations, and then what we call number of log sources, which is just the number of stuff that we're looking at. And our average deal size is in the $15,000 to $20,000 range. Yeah. So the example he's talking about, there's a 1,000 person insurance firm out of Connecticut that had 1 security guy. And I hear the term alert fatigue all the time, and we talk about it, but I've never met someone that I physically met, and he looked like he was going to fall over. He was so tired. And I was like, "Why, you not getting any sleep last night?" He goes, "No, I'm up, I kid you not, all night, every night looking through these logs, because my management requires me to send reports every single day and to validate every single log that's occurring." And he was like, "If they don't get someone in soon, I'm leaving, and they'll have nobody." And that's an opportunity that we ended up winning, simply because we had a really good internal champion that pretty much said he was going to leave if they didn't hire somebody. But ultimately, we could implement a tool set that was going to make his life a little bit easier. And so that's the one that Johnny's referring to. But about our security operations center, so we have 3 SOCs across the globe. I'm based out of the one in Dallas, Texas. We've got one in London and one in the Philippines. They're all staffed 24/7. They all serve their respective geographic locations. We've got about 130 analysts across those SOCs, so it's a pretty pretty decent sized SOC by comparison. The biggest security outsource company right now is Dell SecureWorks. They have 300 and they have 4,000 customers. So you can kind of see the customer to analyst ratio is a lot different with us. Anyone that's in our SOC has at least been a security practitioner for 2 years. They maintain some level of security certification. From a retention standpoint, we have guys that work on our SOC that have been there for 15 years. And so it's a pretty sticky, from an employment perspective, we're able to retain our employees because we get them to do interesting stuff all day long, right? You think if you have an analyst working in a corporation, they may find 1 or 2 events a year. If they're working with us, they're finding events every single day. It's a lot of fun. They get to do forensic threat hunting. It's a cool environment to work in. When you call, you get an analyst on the first ring. You're getting an analyst in your localized region. So if you have a customer that has a question about an event that's occurred, pick up the phone, talk to a guy that can access their environment and look at everything immediately. And again, from a compliance perspective, for both HIPAA and for GDPR, as well as PCI, this does help meet some of those requirements. For PCI, it helps with log retention. For GDPR and HIPAA, it helps with their breach notification laws. With GDPR, you have to do it, I believe, in less than 72 hours. And so we can help them from the time that a breach is discovered to be able to notify the public of that breach in a very short amount of time.
Morgan, maybe talk about, I'm not trying to think softball, but like the north-south traffic and east-west, right? We're watching all eyes on glass. Ivan always speaks about, it's the ass in the seat that's causing the issues, right? It's not not the firewall. It's the users that we're also watching and monitoring, making sure we can shut it down if we need to. That's something.
You got it. No. So I guess the key differentiator is that all customers are going to have a tool set that's introduced within their environment. They have a firewall at minimum. But a firewall is just telling you who's knocking on the door. It's not telling you what's happening within your network. It's certainly not giving you the forensics needed to have a comprehensive view of everything that's occurring within your environment. And so we introduce a tool set that allows us to get a behavioral profile of a customer's network. And we understand what users are doing on a daily basis and when there's deviation from standard behavior. And so an example of that is a user that accesses, let's say, an internal CRM system, and they access 150 records per day. And then today they've accessed 1 million records, and they have an external connection to the internet, and that information is being transferred out. So we have the capabilities to be able to monitor that type of activity and then combine that with intelligence from the other tool sets that we implement, as well as the tools they have in place today, so that we can go do forensics and find out whether or not that's an actual event or it's something that is legitimate. Let's see what else. That's it.
Does us, if someone says they have a firewall, right, and these folks are trying to sell them something or bring us a security solution, we have a firewall, like what would your comeback be, or the second thing when you're seeing, we have this, we have that.
Sure.
We have good on time now, good?
Couple minutes, all right. So the way that we get into these discussions is you're going to ask, well, what are you doing from a security perspective? And they're going to tell you they've got all this stuff in place. And you're going to say, okay, well, who's monitoring that 24/7? What happens if if there's an alert that needs attention? Who's accountable for that? What if it happens on the nights or it happens on weekends? If there's a breach, what do you do? What's your process for notifying, the greater good of the breach occurs? What's the reporting processes for those things? So asking, deeper level questions to kind of better understand, how sophisticated they are from a security perspective will allow you to kind of uncover, well, hey, look, there's someone that can take all this off your plate. We can do 24/7 monitoring. We have the ability to incorporate a tool set. So if they're in the process of shopping for a specific tool, it's a really good time to introduce a service like this. If they're looking at trying to build their own SOC, it's also a good time to do it because we can do it for a lot less. All right, well, I think I'm out of time, so that's it for me. Thanks, everyone.